He walked into that warehouse like he owned it, chin high, boots echoing against the concrete floor, barking orders that sent younger workers scattering out of his way. Dennis Calhoun, the same man who 10 years ago threw my clothes onto the front lawn during a thunderstorm, shouting that I was worthless trash who'd never amount to anything. And now, here he was again, strutting through my warehouse, completely unaware that the new regional manager everyone was whispering about was the 16-year-old boy he'd kicked out into the rain on the worst night of his life. I watched him through the one-way glass, calm, composed. But inside, the air felt electric. The morning sun sliced through the dusty warehouse windows, catching motes of light that floated lazily in the air, like time itself had slowed just to let me savor this moment. Dennis cornered a young forklift operator, his voice sharp as a whip. "You call that stacking? My grandmother could organize pallets better than that, and she's been dead 5 years." The poor kid's face flushed red, hands trembling as he scrambled to fix his mistake. I recognized that look. The fear, the shame, the desperate need not to disappoint. I had worn that expression for years. Dennis still looked good for 48. I'll give him that. Still had that proud military posture he liked to brag about. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed with military precision. His supervisor's uniform, pressed so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. He wore his authority like armor, his voice booming across the floor with practiced intimidation. And the others, they gave him space. The supervisors avoided eye contact. The workers kept their heads down. He was the king of his little kingdom. "Mr. Harrove, should I call him up now?" Jennifer's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. My assistant, new, eager, and blissfully unaware of the history behind that name. She stood beside me with a tablet in her hand, waiting for instructions. I didn't take my eyes off Dennis. "Give him 20 minutes, I said. Let him feel comfortable." He was in the middle of lecturing a group of loaders now, waving his hands like some bitter philosopher of hard labor. "These executives," he said, "sit in their air-conditioned offices making decisions about work they've never done." He snorted. "This new regional manager they're bringing in, probably some trust fund baby with an MBA and soft hands. I've been here 15 years. I should be running this place." One of the workers nodded along, but I caught the quick eye roll when Dennis turned away. They didn't respect him. They tolerated him. Fear can look a lot like respect from a distance. But up close, the difference is written in people's eyes. Dennis checked his phone, irritation etched across his face. He knew he had that meeting soon, the one Frank Delacourt had made mandatory before his retirement. "Waste of my time," he muttered, "teaching another college boy how real work gets done." Jennifer cleared her throat again. "Mr. Harrove, call him up?" I nodded. The intercom crackled. "Dennis Calhoun to the regional manager's office, please. Dennis Calhoun to the regional manager's office." I watched him straighten his uniform, smooth his hair. He cracked a joke to another supervisor, something that made them laugh, probably another jab at the new boss. Then he started walking toward the elevator with that same confident stride I remembered so well, the one that used to make my stomach clench when I heard it coming down the hallway at night. I turned from the glass, walked into my office, and settled behind the mahogany desk. The office was impressive, even by executive standards. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire distribution complex. Awards and certifications covered one wall. A sitting area with expensive furniture, Frank Delacourt's taste, not mine. On the computer screen, I already had Dennis's employee file open. Every year of his career, every evaluation, every reprimand. The knock came exactly 3 minutes later. "Come in." He entered like he was stepping onto a stage, chest puffed out, a smile rehearsed 1,000 times before. He started talking immediately. "Mr. Harrove, it's a pleasure. Always happy to share my expertise with fresh management." Then he looked up and saw me. The words died in his throat. It was like watching a man's soul try to reboot. First came confusion, eyebrows furrowed, then recognition, eyes widening, then shock. His mouth fell open, and for the first time in his life, Dennis Calhoun was speechless. "Hello, Dennis," I said calmly. "Please, sit down." He didn't sit so much as collapse into the chair. "Mason," he whispered. "Mason?" "Mr. Harrove," I corrected softly. "I'm your regional manager now. We have some business to discuss." The color drained from his face. That confident bronze complexion, the one that used to sneer at me from across the dinner table, was gone. "This is some kind of joke," he stammered. "It has to be a joke." "I assure you," I said, turning my computer screen toward him, "this is very real." I leaned forward. "Let's start by reviewing your employment history. 15 years, that's quite a tenure." He looked at the screen. And there it was, his complete personnel file. Every performance report, every disciplinary note, every minor mistake he'd ever tried to hide. And at the top, my name, Mason Harove. His new supervisor, my digital signature on his last review. That's when his knees gave out completely. The man who'd once towered over me while I picked up shards of a plate he'd thrown because my elbows were on the dinner table, now clung to the edge of my desk, trembling. "That's not possible," he whispered. "You were nothing. You were worthless. I threw you out." "Yes," I said quietly, "you did." I paused, letting the silence stretch, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me like I was a ghost. 10 years ago, I was just Mason Hargrove, a quiet kid trying to survive in a house that never felt like home. My real father had died when I was 6, a trucking accident. He'd been hauling steel beams to a construction site in Ohio when another driver fell asleep at the wheel. They said he died instantly. I told myself that meant he didn't suffer, but I was too young to understand that we would be the ones who suffered for years to come. My mom, Patricia, worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. She'd wake up at 4 to prep food at a diner, clean office buildings in the afternoon, then stock shelves at a grocery store until midnight. I made peanut butter sandwiches for my little sister Amber, helped her with homework, tucked her in when mom was still at work. We were holding on by our fingernails, but we were holding on together. Then, Dennis Calhoun walked into our lives. He met Mom at the grocery store one night. He was buying a 6-pack and frozen dinners, cracking jokes about bachelor life. He made her laugh, something I hadn't heard in years. He had a steady job, warehouse supervisor at Delacorte Distribution. To my exhausted mother, he looked like salvation. The courtship was quick, too quick. But I was 12, old enough to notice the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. He brought flowers every Friday, took us out to restaurants we couldn't afford, bought Amber a pink bicycle for her 8th birthday. He even threw a football with me in the yard while the neighbors watched, smiling at the picture-perfect new family. Mom's friends said she was lucky. A good man, a provider, someone who accepted your kids. They married 14 months after Dad died. The wedding was small but nice. Mom looked happy for the first time in forever. Dennis's family filled one side of the church, ours barely filled 2 pews. My grandmother Ruth, Dad's mom, sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of joy. After the honeymoon, we moved into his house on Maple Street, a neat little ranch with a finished basement and a 2-car garage, bigger than anywhere we'd ever lived. Amber got her own room, painted purple. Mom quit 2 of her jobs. On paper, it looked like a new beginning. But the cracks started small. Dennis would come home from the warehouse angry. Always angry. "Bunch of idiots at work," he'd say over dinner. "Management has no clue what's going on down there. Frank Delacorte hasn't worked a real day in 20 years. Then his gaze would turn to me. "You need to toughen up, Mason. Stop reading those damn books. What are you, some kind of professor? Real men work with their hands." When I brought home straight A's, he'd grunt. When I won an essay contest, he hung up on my teacher. Mom changed too, slowly, like someone was turning down her volume day by day. She stopped singing while cooking, stopped laughing altogether. When Dennis criticized me, she'd give me this look, a mix of apology and helplessness, but she never said a word. She always found something else to do, some invisible chore that conveniently took her out of the room. "Patricia," he'd say, "your boy needs discipline. His real father didn't teach him how to be a man." Mom would flinch, but she'd just nod. "Dennis knows best." My grandmother tried to stay in touch. She'd drive over with casseroles, knitted sweaters, but Dennis made it clear she wasn't welcome. "We're not a charity case," he'd sneer. "We don't need handouts from your former in-laws." So I started sneaking out, riding my bike 2 towns over to Grandma's house, telling Mom I was at the library. She'd make tomato soup and grilled cheese, Dad's favorite, and tell me stories about when he was my age, about how he'd built a go-kart from scrap wood and old lawnmower parts, how he'd worked nights to pay for his own car. I used to think maybe, if I learned enough, worked hard enough, I could honor him. I never realized Dennis's mission was to erase him. And as I sat in that office, looking across the desk at the man who once called me worthless, I realized something. Dennis had always been proud of his control, his voice, his authority. But now, sitting in front of me, trembling like a man standing before judgment, he had none of it left, and I hadn't even begun yet. I leaned back in my chair, watching him, the silence stretched between us, heavy, deliberate. Dennis, I said finally, we're going to have a very long conversation about leadership, respect, and accountability. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a trembling breath. Outside, the warehouse continued humming with life, machines whirring, forklifts moving, workers shouting. But in that office, time stood still. He looked up at me, and for the first time in his life, Dennis Calhoun looked small. And this was only the beginning. Your daddy was a fighter, Grandma used to say, her voice soft but sure as she pointed to the picture hanging over her mantel. My father in his army uniform, proud and strong, the kind of man who didn't flinch when life threw its worst at him. You got that same determination in your eyes, Mason, that same goodness in your heart. Don't you let anyone tell you different. And I believed her. Because when you've been told your whole life that you're nothing, a single voice of belief can sound like thunder in the dark. School became my refuge, my sanctuary, the one place Dennis couldn't reach me. While he mocked my grades, called them participation trophies for weak kids, I threw myself into every subject with a desperation that bordered on obsession. I had to make something of myself. Every A, every perfect score felt like a quiet rebellion. Mr. Vega, my business teacher, saw it before I did. You've got a strategic mind, Mason, he told me after class one day, sliding a stack of graded papers into his briefcase. You ever think about college? Business schools would fight to have someone like you. That night, over dinner, I made the mistake of mentioning it. Dennis's fork froze midair, then clattered onto his plate with a metallic clang that made me flinch. College, he said, a sneer twisting his face. You think you're better than me? I make 60 grand a year without some fancy degree. He leaned closer, his eyes cold. You'll work in the warehouse like everyone else. Learn what real work means instead of sitting in classrooms pretending to be something special. I didn't respond. I just stared at my mashed potatoes, pushing them around with my fork, pretending his words didn't sting. But they did. Every one of them. They burned their way into my chest like hot metal. Still, I kept saving. For 2 years, I scraped together every dollar I could, mowing lawns before school, shoveling driveways in the freezing cold, tutoring kids who hated math almost as much as I loved it. I had $540 hidden in an old shoebox under my bed, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it dry. It wasn't much, but to me, it was freedom, my future, until the day it disappeared. It was a Tuesday, the week before my 16th birthday. I came home from school and froze in the doorway. My room was a war zone. The mattress flipped against the wall, drawers dumped out, clothes everywhere. And Dennis, standing in the middle of it all, holding my shoebox like a trophy. Stealing from me now? His tone was calm, which was worse than when he yelled. That's my money, I said, trying to steady my voice. I earned every dollar of it. He laughed. That sharp, barking laugh that made the dogs next door start barking too. Your money? He said. You live under my roof, eat my food, use my electricity. Everything you have belongs to me. This, he shook the box, is going toward household expenses. About time you contributed something useful around here. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. 2 years, I said quietly. 2 years of getting up at dawn to mow lawns. 2 years of hauling mulch till my back gave out. That was for my college applications, for SATs. He took a step closer. I could smell the cigarettes on his breath. College? He smirked. You're even dumber than I thought. You're not college material, Mason. You're barely high school material. Stop trying to be something you're not. That was it. 16 years of holding my tongue snapped all at once. You're right, I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. I'm not like you. I'll never peak in high school and spend the rest of my life bitter about it. You're a pathetic bully, Dennis. A man who needs to tear down a kid just to feel big. His face turned purple. I heard the low rumble in his chest, the warning growl that meant I'd gone too far. My mom appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. Dennis, please. He didn't mean it. Patricia, he said, his voice like ice. Go to your room. But now. She hesitated just for a moment, then turned and walked away. The sound of her door closing down the hall hit harder than any slap. He grabbed me by the collar, lifting me off my feet like I weighed nothing. You think you're a man, he growled. Let's see you act like one. He dragged me down the stairs, my feet scraping against each step. The front door flew open. Rain was starting to fall. Then, he threw me. I hit the concrete walkway so hard the breath was knocked out of me. My palms tore open, blood mixing with rainwater. Across the street, our neighbors, the Johnsons, stood by their window, watching. And then, closing the curtains, Dennis stood in the doorway, one eye framed by the warm light of the house like some twisted portrait of power. You want to be a big shot? He shouted. Do it somewhere else. You're not welcome in my house anymore. He vanished inside and came back with armfuls of my stuff, tossing it onto the lawn like trash, my clothes, my textbooks, the old baseball glove my dad gave me, my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird splashed into a puddle, and my father's photo, the one in his army uniform, fluttered across the grass like a wounded bird. "You can't do this," a voice cried out. Amber, my sister, came running, tears streaking her face. "Mom, do something. He can't just throw Mason out." Dennis grabbed her arm. "Not hard enough to leave a mark, just hard enough to control." "Your brother made his choice," he said coldly. "He thinks he's too good for this family." "I hate you," Amber screamed. "You're not my father. You're nothing." The slap came fast, a sharp crack that froze everyone in place. Amber's hand went to her cheek. Her eyes were wide, not with pain but disbelief. "Inside. Now." His voice was deadly calm. I started to rise, ready to fight, but Amber shook her head. "Go," she mouthed. "Just go." So I did. I grabbed a garbage bag from the trash can, stuffed my clothes and books inside, hands shaking so hard I could barely tie it shut. The rain was falling harder now, cold and relentless. Mrs. Johnson opened her door halfway. I heard her husband whisper, "Not our business, Karen," and then the door closed. I looked up one last time. Mom's face was in the upstairs window. We locked eyes for just a second, 1 second, before she stepped back into the shadows. That moment broke something inside me that took years to repair. I walked 8 miles in the rain. Car headlights flashing by, soaking my jeans, mud splattering up my legs. By the time I reached Grandma Ruth's house, it was past 10. I was freezing, filthy, and crying so hard I could barely breathe. She opened the door before I could even knock twice. One look at me, that's all it took. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me in, wrapped me in blankets, made me hot tea, and held me while I cried. That night, lying in my dead father's childhood room, I made a promise to myself. I would become everything Dennis said I couldn't be. And one day, somehow, he'd know exactly how wrong he'd been. Living with Grandma Ruth changed everything. Her house was small. 2 bedrooms, radiator heat that clanged all night, windows that rattled when trucks passed, but it felt alive. It felt like home. Like home. She gave me my dad's old room. The walls were still covered in his high school football trophies and a faded poster of the 1979 Pittsburgh Steelers. "This was always meant to be yours," she said, patting the bedspread. The next morning, I woke up panicked. What about school? What would people think? How would I even get there? Grandma was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. "Called your principal last night," she said. "Explained the situation. The school bus will pick you up here starting tomorrow. Today, we get you settled." That's who she was, calm in the middle of chaos, always with a plan. She worked as a seamstress, altering wedding dresses and suits for 3 dry cleaners in town. The pay barely covered her bills, but she never complained. That first week, I watched her counting change to buy groceries. It hit me then how much she was sacrificing to keep me there. So I got a job. Stocking shelves at Morrison's Grocery from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Every night I'd come home exhausted, my hands raw from cardboard and cleaning chemicals, but I didn't care. For the first time, the pain meant something. I'd wake up at noon, drag myself to school, push through every class like my life depended on it. Because it did. And slowly, quietly, I started to build something. Not revenge, not yet, but purpose. Every paycheck, every late-night study session, every exhausted morning on the bus, it was a brick, a piece of the foundation for the life I was going to build. One Dennis would never understand. But I wasn't done with him, not by a long shot. Because sometimes, life gives you a second chance to face your demons. And when that chance comes, you make damn sure they remember your name. The clock hit 7:30 a.m., and for most kids my age, that meant the start of another school day. But for me, it was just the midpoint. Because sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. While the world was just waking up, I was already 10 hours deep into another shift at Morrison's Grocery, stocking shelves under flickering fluorescent lights, smelling of dust, sweat, and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Grandma used to warn me every morning when she'd find me passed out over my calculus textbook, still wearing that same faded uniform. "Sweetheart," she'd whisper, "you're going to burn out." And I'd lift my head, eyes bloodshot, throat dry, and mumble the same words every time. "I'm going to prove him wrong." She'd sigh, shaking her head. Proving someone wrong isn't a life plan, Mason. What do you want to prove to yourself? That question haunted me. Even when I was too tired to think, even when the coffee burned my tongue and the world blurred from exhaustion, her voice echoed in my head. So I kept pushing, harder, I picked up 2 more jobs that month. Dishwasher at Antonio's on weekends, landscaping with a crew of Mexican immigrants during summers, guys who taught me more Spanish curse words than any classroom ever could. Every dollar mattered. Every minute had a purpose. Every bruise, every blister, it all went toward one thing: freedom. Grandma helped me open a savings account, one Dennis could never touch. And as the balance grew, so did something else. Not just money, a belief that I wasn't what he said I was. My grades, they didn't just survive, they thrived. I'd study during 15-minute breaks at Morrison's, balancing flashcards on the edge of a shopping cart. I'd finish essays in the dish pit at Antonio's when the restaurant was dead quiet after closing. I'd review notes under the orange glow of a parking lot light, with grass stains on my jeans and calluses on my palms. Teachers noticed. They always do. Mr. Vega found me one morning, literally asleep, standing up against my locker. He shook his head, worry in his voice. "Mason, you're going to kill yourself at this pace." "I'm fine, Mr. Vega." "No, you're not," he said softly. "But you're extraordinary. Let me help." And he did. More than he'll ever know. He started tutoring me for free during lunch, bringing me sandwiches because he knew I couldn't afford my own. He helped me apply for scholarships, wrote letters that made me sound like a hero when I felt like a ghost. He believed in me before I believed in myself. And for the first time in years, college didn't feel like a fantasy. Even when Dennis ripped up my first applications and told me I was wasting my time, Mr. Vega just smiled and said, "We'll print new ones." So we did. I got into community college, the only place I could afford. Business administration major, minor in logistics. Every class was scheduled back-to-back on Tuesdays and Thursdays so I could work the other 5 days straight. My classmates saw the quiet kid who never hung around, who disappeared the moment the lecture ended. They didn't know that I had exactly 18 minutes to clock in at the warehouse, Richmond Shipping, to start my night shift. Yeah, a warehouse, just like Dennis wanted. Except, this time, I wasn't stuck there. I was using it, learning from it. Because knowledge, even the dirty, backbreaking kind, was leverage. I slept in my car between shifts to save gas. My seatbelt left a permanent crease across my shirt. My notebook pages smelled like coffee and diesel, and somehow my GPA stayed perfect. Then came Dr. Rodriguez. Sharp, intense, and terrifying in the best way possible. She taught strategic management, and she could see through excuses like glass. When she announced the Delacorte internship, my heart stopped. 5 positions available, she said. Unpaid, but you'll work directly under Frank Delacorte himself. The room buzzed. Everyone knew what that meant, the gateway to a future. Unpaid meant impossible for me, but I applied anyway. I poured everything into that essay. Every scar, every lesson, every moment I'd swallowed my pride just to keep going. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was calm, but her eyes gave it away. "Mason, Frank Delacorte wants to interview you personally. He was impressed by your essay about turning adversity into advantage." That sentence hit me like a punch. Frank Delacorte, the man Dennis worshipped, the name he used in every argument to remind me of my place. Now I was walking into his office. The building towered over the skyline, glass and steel like something out of another world. I remember wiping sweat from my palms before stepping inside. Delacorte wasn't what Dennis said he was. Not soft, not distant. He was sharp, every word precise, every question a test. He grilled me for an hour on supply chain efficiency, workforce motivation, operational cost reduction, and I answered. Not with theory, but with the truth of sweat and bruises and midnight shifts. "You work nights at Richmond Shipping," he said, scanning my resume, "while attending school full-time, maintaining perfect grades." "Why?" I swallowed hard. "Because I have something to prove, sir. Not to anyone else anymore, but to myself, that circumstances don't define capability." He leaned back in silence, studying me, measuring me. Then he said words I'll never forget. "The internship is unpaid. How would you manage that?" "I'll make it work, sir," I said quietly. "I always do." He raised his hand. "No, I mean you won't need to. I'm creating a new position, paid internship, for exceptional candidates." I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. He smiled. "Congratulations, you start Monday." I stepped outside that building, leaned against my rusted car, and called Grandma. I was crying before she even answered. "Grandma," I whispered, voice shaking. "Oh, Mason," she said softly, "your dad would be so proud." I worked that internship like my life depended on it, because it did. While the other interns clocked out at 5, I stayed until security turned off the lights. I reorganized filing systems, analyzed data no one asked for, shadowed every department from logistics to finance. Frank noticed everything. One night, he stopped by my desk, leaned against the frame, and asked, "What drives you really, Mason?" I hesitated, then told him the truth. "Someone once told me I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything." He nodded slowly. "And you want to prove him wrong?" "I wanted to," I said. "Now, I just want to prove myself right." He smiled. Real, genuine. That's the difference between revenge and success. Remember that. That line changed me. Fast forward a few years, I was 26, and my name, Mason Hargrove, was now printed across every Delacorte distribution announcement. Regional Operations Manager, youngest executive in company history. The email went out on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the whispers reached every corner of the company. Frank himself announced it at the quarterly meeting, his hand on my shoulder as he spoke to 200 employees. "Mason Hargrove has revolutionized our inventory systems," he said. "He's increased efficiency by 38% and saved this company millions. But more importantly, he's worked every level of this operation. That's the leadership we need." The applause roared around me. Cameras flashed, but all I could think about was the man who used to call me worthless. Because somewhere in that crowd, Dennis Calhoun was listening. I didn't look for him that day. Not yet. I waited, because my first assignment as regional manager was to evaluate the main warehouse, Dennis's domain, his throne, his fortress. I spent the weekend reviewing reports, personnel files, complaint records. His name came up again and again, not for achievements, but for abuse. 2 formal warnings for inappropriate comments, multiple HR complaints, declining productivity for 3 years straight. By Monday morning, I was ready. I arrived at 6 a.m., 2 hours before Dennis's shift, and stood in the observation room above the floor. The warehouse stretched out beneath me, humming forklifts, stacked pallets, the rhythm of industry. At 8 sharp, he arrived. Same swagger, same bark. "All right, ladies, let's pretend we actually want to work today," he shouted. His voice carried over the intercom like a ghost from my childhood. The crew exchanged tired looks but stayed silent. They'd learned, like I once had, that silence was safer. Dennis strutted across the loading dock, laughing with younger supervisors. "This new regional manager they brought in, Hargrove, or whatever," he said. "Probably some Ivy League kid who's never lifted anything heavier than a laptop." Laughter followed. One young woman, Melissa, hesitated. "I heard he started in warehouses, actually. Worked his way up." Dennis scoffed. "They all say that. Corporate fairy tales. Trust me, I'll have him figured out in 5 minutes. These execs are all the same, soft hands and soft spines." I let him talk, let him dig the hole. Then, through the speakers, "Dennis Calhoun to the regional manager's office, please." He smirked, checking his reflection in the glass, straightened his collar, practiced his fake corporate smile. "Time to babysit another suit," he joked. He had no idea. No idea he was walking into a reckoning 10 years in the making. When he entered my office, I was facing the window, back turned, hands clasped behind me. The room was everything he'd ever wanted. Mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling glass, leather chairs. Power distilled. "About time management came down from their ivory tower," he said casually. "You need someone to show you how things really work around here. I've been doing this." I turned around, slowly. Letting the silence stretch until it snapped, he froze. His words died mid-sentence. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Mason," he breathed, color draining from his face. I met his eyes. Calm, steady. "Hello, Dennis," I said quietly. "Please sit down." He didn't move, so I said it again, this time not as a son, but as a man who'd every inch of ground between us. "Mr. Calhoun." I leaned forward, voice steady as glass. "I'm your regional manager now." And for the first time in my life, Dennis Calhoun was speechless. The man who once threw me into the rain, who called me worthless, now stood trembling in front of me inside my office. And as I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, did he recognize the boy he'd thrown away? Or was he about to meet the man he created? You ever have a moment so sharp, so poetic, that it feels like the universe itself is balancing old debts? Because that's what this was. I was standing behind the one-way glass, watching Dennis Calhoun swagger into the warehouse like he owned it. He barked orders like a drill sergeant who'd long forgotten compassion, his voice slicing through the air as younger workers scrambled out of his way. That walk, that arrogance, it was all so familiar. The same man who'd thrown my clothes onto the front lawn 10 years ago. The same man who'd stood in the pouring rain screaming that I was worthless trash who'd never amount to anything. Back then, I believed him. Back then I was 16, scared, soaked to the bone, and convinced that maybe he was right. But time has a funny way of rewriting the script. Now here he was, walking through my warehouse. And he had no idea that the new regional manager everyone was whispering about, the man behind that glass, was the boy he'd kicked out into the storm. When I finally stepped into the office, Dennis was already waiting. He looked restless, impatient, the kind of man used to being in charge. But when I sat down behind the desk and he realized who I was, the world seemed to tilt. His body moved in jerky, disconnected motions as he fell into the chair across from me. "This is some kind of joke," he said, voice trembling. "This has to be a joke. You were nothing. You were worthless." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I was 16, I said calmly. "And you were wrong." I turned my computer monitor toward him, angling it perfectly so he could see every detail. His complete personnel file filled the screen. 15 years of documented behavior, complaints, warnings, performance reviews. But what broke him wasn't the list of his failures. It was the signature at the bottom of every document going forward. Mason Hargrove, Regional Operations Manager. His legs gave out completely. The man who once made me eat dinner standing because I didn't deserve a seat at his table dropped to his knees beside my desk. His hands gripped the edge like a man drowning, knuckles white with desperation. "Please," he whispered, tears forming in his eyes. "Mason, please, I have bills. I have responsibilities." "Your mother?" He choked out, trying to find leverage in the only connection we'd ever shared. I met his eyes, cold but controlled. "My mother divorced you 3 years ago," I said. "Amber told me everything. The drinking got worse after I left. The anger got worse. She finally found her courage when you raised your hand to her." I paused, letting the silence speak for me. "She's living with Amber now. She's happy, Dennis, for the first time in years." The tears came fully then, rolling down his weathered cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong about you. You have to understand. I was just trying to—" "No," I cut in. "You weren't trying to do anything noble. You were a small man who needed others to feel smaller. You told me I was worthless and threw me out like garbage. That was your choice. Now you live with the consequences. But here's the thing. I didn't fire Dennis that day. That would have been too easy. That would have been revenge. And I'd moved past revenge years ago. Instead, I transferred him to our smallest facility in Riverside, 40 miles from his home, a place where he'd work under Sandra Reeves, the woman he'd once filed a complaint against for not understanding how men work. When I called Sandra to tell her about the transfer, she laughed. "Are you serious?" she said between chuckles. He complained that I was too strict about safety protocols, said I was micromanaging because I'm a woman. This is perfect, Mason. I'll make sure he learns what real management looks like. Dennis had two choices: accept the transfer with a 20% pay cut and work under Sandra's supervision, or resign without severance. He chose to stay. Pride doesn't pay mortgages. And at 48, with no degree and a reputation stained by arrogance, his options were limited. The man who told me I'd never amount to anything now drove an hour and 20 minutes every day to take orders from a woman he once tried to get fired. 3 weeks after that, my mother reached out. She'd heard the news. Small towns always talk. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. No ghosts there. She looked older, but somehow lighter, like stress had aged her face, but freedom had softened it again. She cried through most of our conversation, apologizing over and over for not protecting you, for choosing Dennis's house over your safety. "I was weak," she said, gripping her coffee cup with shaking hands. "I was so tired of being poor, of being alone. Dennis seemed like stability. I traded your childhood for a false sense of security. I'll never forgive myself." I forgave her that day. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We talk now. Birthdays, holidays, safe topics. She's an office manager at a dental practice. Lives in a small apartment with Amber when she's home from nursing school. She's dating a man named Robert. Owns a hardware store, gentle voice, steady hands. He's never raised his voice in the 2 years they've been together. I'm happy for her, but I know we'll never have the relationship we could have had. Some wounds don't disappear. They harden. They become scars. And scars are just boundaries written on skin. Amber and I grew closer through it all. She became a nurse, inspired by the chaos we survived. "Watching you save yourself saved me too," she told me at her graduation. "You showed me that we don't have to accept the life someone else assigns us. We can write our own story." Now she works in pediatric care, specializing in abuse cases. She sees the signs others miss, the quiet fear, the flinches, the silence. She saves kids every day, giving them what we never had: intervention, hope. Dennis stole her childhood, and she turned that pain into a mission to protect others. Even Grandma Ruth got to see how far I'd come. She passed last year at 73. At her funeral, Frank Delacourt himself gave the eulogy. He said, "Ruth Hargrove raised a giant, not in size but in character. She took a broken boy and helped him build himself into an unbreakable man." That's a legacy worth celebrating. She left me her house and a letter. Inside, she'd written, "Your father would be so proud of who you became, not because of your success, but because you chose kindness over cruelty when you had every reason to choose otherwise. That's the real victory." And she was right. Kindness is the real victory. I still run Delacourt Distribution. Frank retired 2 years ago. We've grown 30% since then. But the number I'm proudest of isn't profit, it's 200. That's how many young people our Hargrove initiative has helped. Kids aging out of foster care or escaping abusive homes. Full scholarships. Guaranteed jobs. Mentorship. A second chance at life, the one I wished someone had given me. Just last month, a young man named Tyler, who'd been kicked out at 17, got promoted to warehouse supervisor. He sent me a handwritten note. It said, "You showed me that being thrown away doesn't mean you're garbage. It means you're free to become anything you want." I keep that note in my desk drawer, right next to Grandma Ruth's letter. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I drive past the old house on Maple Street, the place where Dennis destroyed my childhood. Another family lives there now. There are bikes in the driveway, a tire swing in the oak tree, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, laughter, life, normal things. Things that never existed when Dennis ruled that house. And every time I see it, I hope those kids never hear the words I did. But if they do, I hope they learn what I learned, that the words of broken people only have the power we give them. Dennis called me worthless when I was 16, but that insult, that moment became the greatest gift he ever gave me. Because in trying to destroy me, he forced me to build myself into something unbreakable. He thought he was throwing away trash, but he was actually setting potential free. 10 years later, when he fell to his knees in my office, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't become his boss to humiliate him. I'd become successful despite him, not because of him. My success was never about Dennis. It was about Mason. It was about proving that our circumstances don't define our capabilities, that cruelty doesn't create character, and that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's transcendence. It's becoming so far beyond someone's ability to hurt you that their opinion becomes irrelevant. It's building a life so full of purpose that there's no room left for old pain. That's what I showed Dennis on my computer screen that day. Not his failures, but my transformation. Not his darkness, but my light. And for the first time in his life, Dennis Calhoun finally understood what he truly lost. He hadn't lost control. He hadn't lost a son. He'd lost the chance to witness greatness growing in his own home, to be part of something extraordinary, to claim even a sliver of pride in a success story that inspires hundreds of others. And that's the ultimate victory. Becoming the person your younger self needed to exist. Proving that worthless is just a word angry people use when they're terrified of your potential. Because in the end, every insult, every scar, every night you thought you wouldn't make it becomes proof. Proof that you were never broken, you were becoming. And the ones who tried to break you, they'll spend the rest of their lives realizing they never had that power to begin with. The question now is, what will you build from what tried to destroy you?